which I think is kind of what I was fumbling through trying to say.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, Scott honestly Scott is one of those writers that a couple times I bounced poems off of because, I think he's got a really good read on the work itself and the author's voice. And so, I think Scott excels at that. Because the Prince book is basically like that,
Well, it's interesting because that is a common theme among most of the Brick Cave roster. Most of the Brick Cave roster, I would say, are fairly deep readers, which I think translates through in what they write. So, all right, you ready? Jen, are we good? Are we ready for 2020? Yes. All right, let's do this. 2020. 2020 is a busy year because, as you can tell, but I want to kick it off because I want to give a moment to someone who's been with us for the entire 2 hours, did not have a chance to talk up until now because we just got his book out this year. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Hare. So Patrick, what I want to ask you is, corporate boilerplate vinegar is basically it's an encompassing piece of work across your entire writing that you've done so far.
That's right. Talk
about what it's like to bring all of these different pieces of you together into one collection.
Well, first of all, it's always good to go through your stuff and find out what's offensive today when it wasn't offensive when you wrote it.
Of course.
And then it does show kind of a shift, and also that I've had a lot of jobs in my life because I had to pay rent, and I've hated almost every one of those jobs. But at the same time, it's sort of an amplification, really, because I haven't hated them enough to quit. So it is interesting to see that there's just certain aspects, and it's not necessarily the work, but the people at the work that you're dealing with that is kind of what brings you down most of the time. And so it was also fun to see, okay, there were pieces that I wrote for Slam that were meant to be read out loud and in some sense they were for cash and prizes. And then there were other ones that were more serious that I would never read at a Slam. And I was thinking, how are these things going to go together? The tone shifts from poem to poem. It's not easy to get a coherent voice from one poem to the next one.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. I'm going to pivot just a little bit because we've got a lot of books to cover in a short amount of time, but Scott is the first Brick Cave author to have released 2 books in the same year. And that is a record held by him unless we can beat that record this year with Bill's.
Scott is in, by the way. He's still in the attendee, so he can join.
Well, yes, but he hasn't released his book this year yet, so we're still working. Oh. But Bill, who released, and I'm just going to say it's Moths. I'm just going to call it Moths because I cannot remember the entire title that takes up the entire cover of the book right off the top of my head. But we released that in March, April, and it looks like we could potentially get a second book out before the end of the year. What do you think?
What?
Okay, you get this out?
I can't hear you, Bob.
Oh, you can't hear me at all?
I can hear you now, but you were trailing off.
Oh, Marcus, you want to check his volume on his?
No, I could hear, but I couldn't hear you. You weren't loud enough. You weren't speaking loud enough.
I'm not loud enough. All right. So, all right. Let me try and be louder for you then. So, what I'm talking about is the fact that there's the potential that you could have 2 books of poetry out this year. The one that we released earlier this year. And
I don't think it'll happen.
Okay. All right.
Can you do it in 2 weeks?
Probably not.
Then it won't happen.
But talk about moths and kind of where that title comes from, because there's not necessarily the actual title itself, but the idea of the running title that you like to use, where that comes from.
It's just me trying to be verbose. I don't always have a lot to say, so
It's basically his homage to Fiona Apple.
Yeah. Who's that?
She's Fiona Apple.
No.
Okay.
Over his head.
I'm sure she's a real peach.
Ah.
Ah.
Now her second album was entitled "When the Pawn," and then it like trailed off for like 5 paragraphs.
Oh. No, I just like stringing titles. I like it. I did a couple that were, you know, so and so and so, or you know, blah blah blah. I think it stems back to when I was a kid, and the Rocky and Bullwinkle show would be on. They did a lot of that.
Okay.
Who's the guy who was the mastermind of that? J. Fred Ward? Was that his name? Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'm sure with the seed was planted back then for that, and then I would do that, and then I noticed that some people here in town were starting to do that. One in particular, and I said, "Well, wait a minute, that's my shtick." So then I decided, okay, well, if he's going to do it, I'm just gonna step on it. I'm going to do it like nobody else does it.
So, Bill, the poems are getting, I won't say they're getting longer, but there are fewer shorter poems. Do you just find that you're writing differently, or what's going on?
It's just an evolution,
Okay.
you know. I'm no longer writing haiku because I think that had stunted my ability to write anything other than 17 syllables.
Okay, all right.
Not that I have anything against haiku. I mean, a good haiku is still, you know, near and dear.
So I'm going to pivot just a touch, because in addition, in March, we actually released a follow-up to Platinum Magic. So we released Gold Magic in March. And so Bruce, talk a little bit about what it's like to revisit that universe, and you know, kind of where to put your head in terms of, hey, this is a series as opposed to just a one-off.
I'd always intended at least 3 or 4 books in the series, but books that would reasonably well stand alone. I really don't do well with trying to write the long, you know, arc trilogy. I admire people who can. I just can't sustain that. In Gold Magic, though, I found myself really wanting to explore the exploitation of the orcs and how that world interacted with them. Just background in this world, orcs are the underclass, and mainly because they engaged in a genocidal war against the other races about 200 years earlier and lost. So they came out on the losing end. They have their own empire, but it's kind of wayward and backward. And the rest of the world kind of exploits them. We can see modern things in this, yes. And I really wanted to kind of both explore that society and how the other races interacted with that. So I hope I succeeded with that.
I think you did. I liked it. I think it's a fantastic book. But then I published it. So there you go.
Well, hopefully we'll have Silver out next year sometime. And I'm going to pivot back then to some of the original concepts in Platinum Magic, revisit some characters there, and try to tie a little bit of this international intrigue that we hint at in the first 2 books back together again.
Cool. So in addition to Gold Magic, we also released Return to Honoria, which is the book where we go back to, obviously, Return to Honoria. So it's been 5 years since that time. Sharon, what's it like when you're separated from that universe? Because I happen to know that this writing process started, there was some separation between Nelig and returning to Honoria. So what's it like to get back into those characters in that place?
It wasn't very hard for me, actually. Surprisingly, I didn't have that any trouble getting back into my characters. My characters are so realized to me, as the voices in my head are, that I don't seem to have any trouble getting back into the characters. The world had to have changed, of course, and they had to have grown a little bit, but I didn't have any trouble getting back into them. What I had trouble with was, what I always have trouble with, is coming up with a decent plot to go along with the character arc. So my character arcs are always what I develop first, and then I sort of have to build the plot around it, which is very different than the way a lot of people write. And so it took me some time to figure out what that story was that would offer the learning curve, if you will, of a character arc for those two characters, and also put them back in the world, and give me the opportunity to revisit and renew that acquaintance. I don't know that I had ever really planned to write a sequel to Nelig Stones, but I had so many, again, I had fans wanting another book. I had so many people who, 10 and 11-year-old boys, reluctant readers, all these kiddos who were reading now, and parents who were excited because their kiddos were reading because of Nelig Stones. And I felt like, oh, well, they keep asking, so I should give them something. And that's kind of where that stemmed from.
Cool. And then I kind of held Joe over just because I would like to think that we've got a little bit of a Christmas present for readers out there that we're hopefully in the very final stage of, and can actually share that. But that's actually the book that he's referencing on his virtual background. But the book is called The Warden's Legacy, completely new sort of story, separate from anything you've written in the past. So I'm going to ask you, when you become attached to a world like you did with the Ascension, how hard is it to leave that world and start a totally different fantasy book? I'd argue that War Golem's not really a fantasy.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not difficult to start a new world. It's difficult to create a world. I don't know. I kind of like Warden's Legacy has a lot of similarities to the world in the Ascension trilogy. It's just a different place and time. It's almost like very far into the future, but like the magic system is very similar.
All right. So the reason that I brought that up, and the reason I kind of held them over, is we're in the very final sort of getting the proof and looking it over and making sure everything's done, and then we'll spring that upon the earth at that moment. But I did want to close out, because we're getting right up near the end, and I'm going to give Louise kind of the last word, because she's the book that started the year, and it's been a very interesting and challenging year. And it's ironic that that's the book that started this year, because that book requires a lot of hope if you read it. And I think that has been a requirement for a lot of us this year. So talk to us a little bit about that, about the concept of hope, of the fact that, hey, we can survive this.
Well, the original early ending, which I discarded because it wasn't interesting enough, not to me anyway, was right. It was before there was a real resolution. And so if you want to talk about suspending hope, the original ending did do that. The new ending furthered the story more, gave it it resolved lots of things more, and it pushed the character in a new place where a lot of things would be changed and different and harder, which would set the stage if I would. I mean, it could be like Sharon was saying, it could be a standalone book easily, but it does have enough open ends to continue the story. And I do know what happens. So I mean, the book wasn't written like, let's be hopeful. It was like, let things keep going wrong and keep going wrong and keep going wrong. And you just, like, I think I mentioned before that the only villain is the cold universe, where just like in 2020, things keep going wrong, things keep going wrong, and you keep going. I mean, I think my mantra and advice to writers, not and anybody tasking, is start anywhere and keep going, both of which are hard. So that's kind of like what she'll have to do. The character is keep going. Yeah.
Cool.
Does that suffice?
That's fantastic. Thank you. So I'm going to let Jen do one more giveaway while Marcus brings everybody back on, and then I do want to do a closeout and a thank you before we wrap it up here. So Jen.
All right. I'm going to throw caution to the wind and mildly ask permission. Can I do two? Can I do two at the end?
Yeah, this is your last giveaway.
Can I do two giveaways?
Oh, yeah.
Two for one? Okay,
Yeah.
good. Because I saw something on the list of attendees, RSVP list, and I'm going to acknowledge these two people that are going to get a giveaway, and I'm going to give them Warden's Legacy when it comes out, because that's part of my giveaway list. Because these two people have been like following Brick Cave for as long as they've been following Brick Cave since forever, since I've helped out, and I'd like to acknowledge them because I know that they always have been there. Dee and Annabelle.
So Dee.
Dee and Annabelle.
Missed it. You're skipping.
She said Dee and Annabelle. Those two
Okay.
people.
I think it's my Wi-Fi.
Gotcha. There you go. All right. Dee and Annabelle. So those are our final two. Those are our final two winners.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Good job, Jen. Thank you
It's
so
in
much.
the chat. Weird.
No, you're good. You're good. I think we're starting to see some internet bandwidth issues. So at least here we are. First of all, I want to thank you guys for doing this. I know it was a little bit of a last minute thing, and it was a little bit of a throw it together, and it was a little bit hectic, and we struggled a little bit at the beginning. But I wish I had another 2 hours to kind of talk to you guys in more detail about every single book that we've released over the last 10 years. Obviously, I think they're all fantastic books because I'm the guy that's out there publishing them and selling them. But they really are fantastic books. And I think you should all be proud of the work that you have done. And I hope to see more work from you going forward. Just so you know, we had hit our goal. Our goal was to, or I should say my goal really, was to sell 10,000 books in the first 10 years. And I didn't think we were really going to hit it coming into this year with everything that was happening. And thankfully, we caught a little bit of fire in the second half of the year. And we were able to kind of make up some lost ground and not only make up lost ground, but really surge ahead a little bit. So, we're closing in on 12,000 books sold now before the end of the year for the first 10 years of what we've done. So kudos to you guys for that. Thank you for writing those books. Those books matter to people. Those books impact people. People love those books. I know Bruce goes out a lot with us, and Bill, you've been out with us, and obviously Louise has been out with us, and Sharon's out everywhere. You guys hear it. So you see the readers that come to us and say, when's the next one of those come out? Or, oh, I really loved this book. And that's because of you guys and the work that you do and the words that you create. So thank you for doing that. I do want to run down a real quick list of thank yous that is less than a page long, I promise. First of all, I want to thank Marcus, who has been running around like a chicken with his head cut off. trying to keep everything together and managing to pull the event together. I want to thank John Blair. We didn't get to share his animations. He did some fantastic animations for us, but I will share those. I want to thank the Mesa Chamber for hosting us. I want to thank Mesa Community College for hosting us. I want to thank the Goddess Trilogy, Jenn, Labuz, Amber Skinner, Claudia Romero. I want to thank all the interns that we've had at Brick Cave, because the interns have done so much for us. Jackie, Alex, Katie, Marcus, Ariana, and whomever I forgot. You guys, so Bill, Scott, Jen, Sharon, Joe, Colette, Louise, Bernard, Bruce, Patrick, Adam, and Marcus, thank you all for being authors with Brick Cave. And of course, over the years, we've had a number of fantastic volunteers, including but not limited to Yvonne Chavez, Trish, Joseph Nieves, Jenn Labuz. Happy birthday, by the way. Thank you for all of the work that you guys have done. And to everybody that's watching this, whether it's now, it's live, or you're watching it later because we've edited it up. Thank you to everybody that has bought a Brick Cave book or read a Brick Cave book over these first 10 years, because that's what has made this possible. We've got a lot of plans for the next 10 years, and I think everybody on this call has hinted at what their plans are. They want to write more books. They want to get more done, and I want to be there to be a part of that. And I want to make sure that we promote that. So